Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first 2025 edition of the Richard Haynes Real Estate Show. We are fired up here for the new year to bring you some great podcast content, blogs, Instagram stories, and are really excited for the new year on bringing you great data, thought-provoking stories, and of course, the most immediate updates here on South Bay Real Estate. If you don't know me already, I'm your host, Richard Haynes, the owner and broker here at Haynes Real Estate. We're located in Greater Los Angeles, where we focus on the South Bay home market, cities of Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, and the entire Palos Verdes Peninsula. This show is going to be action-packed for you because we now have the full 2024 numbers, the results of all the home markets for the year. I'm going to share with you some great data. And of course, like I do every year, I make my fearless real estate predictions. And oftentimes they turn out great, sometimes not so much, but hopefully it gives you some things to think about here in the real estate market in the South Bay. I'd be remiss if not mentioning before the start of the show, yesterday was the start of the Palisades fire, the Eaton fire, the Hearst fire, among others. I want to say our hearts go out to the families and people affected by those fires and who are losing their homes. It certainly hits close to home here in the South Bay because, of course, one of the markets we cover is the Palos Verdes Peninsula, which has a very similar coastal terrain and vegetation like the Palisades. It could have very easily happened here in the South Bay. Instead, it's happening in the North Santa Monica Bay, in the Pacific Palisades. And again, our hearts go out to all of those families affected by these crazy winds and fires. With that said, you guys, we're going to jump right into the show here in the new year. It's Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. I have fresh data and a bunch of forecasts to share with you. And of course, with regards to the fires being a very big topic here in Greater Los Angeles, I want you to stay tuned for the next week or two's episode, where I think I'm going to dive into some insurance topics, especially fire insurance, and how you can ensure you protect your home in light of these fires. I wrote a blog about this 2 or 3 years ago with the last big round of Southern California fires, and I think it's appropriate to update, especially our listeners who maybe don't read the blog, about certain types of policies you should consider when it comes to insuring your home. So make sure you check in with us in the next week or two, and hopefully I'll have that podcast up for you all. But to get to today's episode, we're going to get to two main topics. Both, I think, are juicy and things that you guys are all going to love. Number one is going to be the best and worst performing markets here in the South Bay, Submarket. So we're breaking down 30 to 40 markets and finding the top 5 and bottom 5 submarkets here in the South Bay. You'll hear about all those, and of course, next week I'll write about it on the blog so you can read it in letter format. The second part of the show is going to be my fearless predictions for South Bay real estate. There's some greater macro predictions that I make, and then, of course, micro predictions here in the South Bay. Some years I nail them all, other years I'm completely off, so do not take this as advice, but think of it more as thought-provoking as you continue your real estate journey if you're a buyer or a seller here in the South Bay. So let's jump right into it, you guys. 2024 is now concluded. We can take a full set of yearly data in 2024 and see how the year shook out compared to the year prior. This is always fun to have a full set of seasonal data and get these numbers in. So you may not hear about where you live or the submarket because there's only 5 slots for either, but you will get a taste of some of the hottest markets and some of the lowest markets. So let's talk about the best performing submarkets of the South Bay in 2024. We are going to start in 5th place is Palos Verdes Estate submarket of Monte Malaga. This neighborhood is already one of the most expensive neighborhoods on the hill. Easily one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Palos Verdes Estates, right up there with Malaga Cove. And Monte Malaga had just an amazing year, up double digits, but up 20.3% in 2024, which is an incredible number with an already pricey market that had a nice run during COVID. In 4th place is in South Redondo Beach, homes south of Torrance Boulevard. This is not west of PCH, but homes south of Torrance Boulevard, east of PCH, had a great year, rising 20.1%. You guys, this is amazing because last year, South Redondo, south of Torrance Boulevard, was in the bottom 5 performing submarkets in 2023. It has had a major bounce back, jumping 21.1%. It is back. Housing prices haven't really lost a step now over the past couple of years, and great news for the housing market there. In 3rd place is Rancho Palos Verdes La Cresta neighborhood that grew 24.5%. A simply amazing jump in real estate prices, and really something you don't see all that often in that neighborhood. So a huge jump. Outside of COVID, there's probably not been a jump that big in the La Cresta neighborhood in many, many years. 2nd place belongs to Manhattan Beach's Maricosta submarket, which is a section of East Manhattan Beach around Maricosta High School. It saw a notable jump of 26%. And much like South Redondo submarket that was in the bottom 5 worst performing submarkets last year, this area was also in one of the 5 worst performing submarkets last year. So amazing to see how poorly Maricosta performed last year, and this year having an incredible bounce back, seeing prices jump 26%. And finally, getting to the number 1 performing submarket in the entire South Bay, that honor goes to Manhattan Beach's Hill section. You guys, it had a remarkable 34.9% increase. And to continue this theme, what's amazing, this market was also in the bottom 5 worst performing submarkets of last year. So 3 out of the 5 best performing submarkets this year in the South Bay were in the bottom 5 worst performing submarkets. So quite frankly, they had many easy comps to come off of and bounce off of. But you guys, we don't always see the worst submarkets recover to the top 5 best submarkets. But it's really nice to see that in the South Bay, if a submarket or neighborhood has an off year, there's opportunity for you to go in and buy, and also that the South Bay is resilient, where the market will bounce back and overcorrect one way or another, which really shows the resilience of our South Bay home markets. Let's move on now to the bottom 5 performing South Bay submarkets. And unfortunately, this is kind of a negative topic, but you have to hear the bad with the good. And yes, even though we had solid performance here in 2024, unlike 2023, where the entirety of the South Bay was down. In 2023, Manhattan Beach was down overall as a city, Hermosa was, Redondo Beach, and all of the Palos Verdes Peninsula cities because we were coming off of highs in 2021 and 2022, and 2023 was a rough year with surging interest rates. So know that last year, all cities pulled back on a price point perspective in the South Bay. And unfortunately, here in 2024, there are still a few submarkets that had pullbacks. So in fifth place for 2024, the fifth worst performing submarket was Hermosa Beach's sand section, which declined by 5.8%. Not terrible, not these huge jumps that we saw, 20 and 30% in the best performing submarkets, but we did see a decline of just over 5% in the sand section of Hermosa Beach. Manhattan Village, which had horrible performance during COVID, bounced back as a standout top 5 performer last year in a big bounce back, is now back in the bottom 5 again with a reversal of 12.5%. Palos Verdes Drive South in third place, dropping 12.7%. West Palos Verdes dropping 16.6%. Both of these, again, were in the top 5 performing markets last year, much like Manhattan Village. So again, we have 3 out of the 5 worst performing markets were the best performers last year. So again, difficult comps now for them to come back and continue their surge, and now they are down as a result. So again, maybe a little bit of volatility that doesn't tell the whole story. Our markets are resilient. When you go up 20% one year, if you go down 10% the next year, you're still really crushing it. Or if you go down 5% one year or 7%, and then we see bounce backs of 20, 25%, the South Bay overall is in still good hands, which I will get to in about 2 minutes with how cities performed, which gives you a much more smooth curve. So to wrap up the worst performing markets, the worst performing market, the number one market for worst performers was Rancho Palos Verdes Mira Catalina submarket, which plummeted 17%. Okay, so unfortunately, we saw 3 out of the 5 worst performers were out of Rancho Palos Verdes. That may have had to do with some of the fears around the landslide. And of course, Palos Verdes Drive South is the bullseye of the landslides with Portuguese Bend Club and the Seaview communities. And then, of course, Mira Catalina does not have much sliding, but it's right above that submarket, which probably made people a little nervous to step in and make buys. So there you guys have it, the best and worst performing submarkets of 2024. If you want to know a little bit more breadth of everything, we saw the rest of the markets range from down 1.2% all the way up to 17% up if you take the remaining submarkets that we didn't talk about. And the median jump in, or the median submarket movement, was somewhere between 7.5% and 9.5% growth. So overall, the market was very positive. There were only 6 submarkets that were down, and probably another 25 submarkets that were all up on the year, and most of them up greater than 5%. So really, it is a positive year for the South Bay. Only a few bad performers, some really amazing performers, and overall a nice, solid year for the South Bay. So let's move on to our next topic, my South Bay real estate fearless predictions, which before we get into the predictions, I'm now going to read off to you the 2024 results for cities. So yes, there are 30 plus submarkets that we typically cover, but when you take cities that combine, say Redondo Beach, which has 7 submarkets, we're going to take all of those and give you a much smoother, less volatile result of median prices. So let's start with Manhattan Beach. Manhattan Beach was up in 2024 as a whole by 8%. So the city of Manhattan Beach saw home prices appreciate by 8% in 2024. 90274, which typically includes Palos Verdes Estates, Rolling Hills Estates, and unincorporated Palos Verdes Peninsula. Those markets in the 90274 area code of the peninsula were up a nice 5.2%. When it comes to 90275, which is typically all of Rancho Palos Verdes saw its markets appreciate by 3.9%, which is pretty darn good considering that some of those submarkets were slammed by landslide risk and major depreciating home prices. So overall, Rancho Palos Verdes still came out ahead despite those challenges. 90254, which is the city of Hermosa Beach, Hermosa was up 2.3%. And then you have South Redondo 90277, which does include portions of Hollywood Riviera with a Redondo Beach PO. This is by far the best performing area, essentially South Redondo 90277, up a whopping 15.5%. And you guys, as you heard, one of the best performing submarkets was South Redondo, south of Torrance Boulevard. As a whole, South Redondo was on fire this year. So an amazing result in 2024. And then 90278, all of North Redondo was up 2.6%. So those are the results on your local cities for 2024. I may write a blog about this more in depth. And of course, on the best and worst performing submarkets, I think we may list all of the market's performers. So if you check our blog next week, you can see the best and worst performers along with the other to see what your local submarket did. All right, moving on to my fearless predictions. I'll typically have anywhere between 4 and 6 predictions. Of course, this year I'm right in the middle with 5 predictions, 4 of those being predictions for this year. And always at the end, I give a long-term bet on something that can't really be measured in a year, but what I think will impact our real estate market or real estate industry many years into the future. Okay, so let's get into it. Prediction 1 of 5. South Bay home markets repeat their 2024 performance. And what I mean by that is, if you read my recap of my predictions in December on the blog, I was actually pretty close, predicting a 0 to 5% increase across our South Bay markets that we cover. And really outside of South Redondo, we kind of fell in the 2 to 8% range for appreciation here on our Manhattan, Redondo, Hermosa, and Palos Verdes Peninsula submarkets. So I am calling much more of the same. Why? We still have historically low inventory. It shot up big time in Rancho Palos Verdes, but with the rest of those South Bay markets, we saw it move up at a snail's pace. I think we're going to see more of the same, and unfortunately, inflated interest rates that are typically going to be the same as last year as well, which means I think we still have the same performance. So rather than predicting 0 to 5% last year, I'm going to say between 2 and 7% because, again, outside of South Redondo, we saw 2 to 8% appreciation. I'm predicting for 2025, most South Bay markets will see between 2 and 7% appreciation. That's a nice growth clip if inflation is 2 to 3% and you can hit that or slightly outperform inflation. That is a great place to be for the South Bay market and healthy. My hope is we're actually a little bit lower, which I'll get to down the road, but more of the same, 2 to 7% appreciation throughout the South Bay, just like 2024. Mortgage rates is going to be my prediction 2 of 5. Mortgage rates continue to disappoint. Now, typically, it is a fool's game to try and guess interest rates. Most people get it wrong. I have been caught many times trying to predict interest rates and got it completely wrong. Last year, I nailed it. We had a ton of pundits going, interest rates are going to go back down to 5%. If we're lucky, maybe dip into the 4s. I wasn't a believer with how strong the home market was. The Fed and mortgage rates really needed to stay higher to keep home prices from going crazy and just being incredibly unaffordable. And that's typically what happened. I guess that they would be a little lower, but would still stay elevated in the high 5s or 6%. What ended up happening last year is we did get into the high 5s for a very short period of time, and we pretty much stayed in the 6s for the remainder of the year. What do I believe here for 2025? My official prediction, I believe, again, another boring call like my first one, more of the same in 2024. I'm not trying to rattle your feathers and say rates are going to go to 8 to 9%, or get ready, guys, we're going to 4%. These are boring predictions, but they're likely what I think will happen, and we're not trying to grab headlines or earn clicks, but more of the same in 2025 of what you saw in 2024. I actually think we're going to see these elevated interest rates again, where conventional loans are going to be between 6 and 6.5% in the South Bay, and jumbo loans could hit 5.75% like we saw in the summertime of this past year, and then range all the way up to 6.25%. We are still seeing national loans in the high 6s or 7s, but typically conventional conforming will be a little bit less here in Southern California, and jumbo rates get preferential treatment because their buyers are so financially sound. So more of the same, 5.75 to 6.25% for jumbo borrowers, 6 to 6.5% for conforming conventional buyers here in the South Bay. Moving on to prediction 3 of 5, home inventory rises at a snail's pace. I alluded to this a little bit in prediction number 1, but you guys, even though home inventory is rising, for the most part in the South Bay, it's still historically low. And while most markets are rising, they're rising at a snail's pace and a fraction of what they should be rising. Now, the news that you'll hear or more people talking about is Rancho Palos Verdes actually saw a surge of inventory year over year, which is a positive. Some of that is due to the landslides, but even outside of the landslide areas, there are more RPV homes because we've had that COVID surge that has subsided, and people don't want to live in the quote-unquote faraway markets of Rancho Palos Verdes. They're going back to work. They're getting closer to restaurants. And while RPV's faraway markets are incredibly desirable, low interest rate and COVID-fueled migration doesn't exist anymore, and so we're seeing that inventory rise closer to historical trends. But outside of that, Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, the other Palos Verdes cities are seeing historically low inventory. Those areas are rising slowly, and I believe they will continue to rise slowly. As much as people talk about people need to sell or move eventually, which they do, and we have a lot more people calling us this year, ultimately the golden handcuffs of low interest rates are too powerful. And I have clients who are like, we're going to try and buy and not sell our current home because that low leverage at 3% or lower is just too valuable. So in a nutshell, prediction 3 of 5 is inventory will rise at a snail's pace, still much to the disappointment to buyers, and that is really going to be our greatest buoy of why we're going to grow 2 to 7%, even amid low affordability, which is the perfect segue to prediction 4 of 5, which is about affordability. Affordability casts a shadow on housing. And you guys, this is something we can't really weigh, but as you know, our avid readers and podcast listeners know I like to report on affordability every quarter because it really has been the greatest forecasting number of where housing prices go. And unfortunately, the lower the affordability, the fewer people that can afford to buy, which basically means we could be at the end of big home growth or home growth at all. And the reason why I talk about home affordability casts a shadow, so while we will have low inventory, that will support housing prices, and I think we still grow. If rates stay elevated, ultimately affordability is going to get to its second lowest level we've ever seen, if not match the low affordability numbers right before the housing bubble burst in 2007 to 2010. I am not trying to strike fear into your hearts and say we have a housing bubble. There are much stronger fundamentals. But if we get into the 12 to 17% affordability range, it puts the market on unstable ground, meaning if the economy has a big recession or there's an economic shock or a World War III or something of that where inflation runs out of control and we go to double-digit interest rates, the market is simply going to have to come down as a result. Affordability, where less than 20% of residents in the state can afford a house, if there is any sort of economic shock or something that goes wrong, that will be a huge negative for our housing market. Do I think it happens in 2025? No, unless there's some unknown black swan that we don't see. I think 2025 we are good, but any sort of shock that happens at the end of the year or maybe in 2026, that's where the long, dark shadow of low affordability puts kind of a negative light on the housing market, even if we have appreciation. And if there's negativity on affordability in the housing market, sometimes that keeps buyers from buying and sellers a little bit more afraid. And we have a market that might underperform after 2025. So make sure to watch affordability on the year. And then last prediction is my long-term bet. It's another one that you've probably already thought of, but my long-term bet is AI's real estate debut. Now, my past long-term bets have talked about 3D printing of property, making building much more affordable. I've talked about automation of self-driving cars will drive rural or more suburban neighborhoods' values when people can work in their car or sleep in their car on their way to work. I've talked about the blockchain in past long-term bets, showing that home sales happen on the blockchain. And then this year, of course, I'm getting into AI or AI agents, making real estate more affordable and more efficient for you. Let me give you examples. Loan automation. You guys, the loan industry is massive when it comes to residential real estate. You have loan officers who need to be paid, loan processors that need to be paid. You have underwriters from the bank who underwrite all of your financials, loan boards who double check the underwriting. You have higher ups that double check everything. You have funders, et cetera, et cetera. If AI, with the banks especially, have all of your statements, your bank account, your FICO, your wealth, they should have AI agents that should be able to underwrite you as a loan buyer faster, cheaper, and in a very efficient manner, making our market more liquid and saving people on loan costs and the banks being able to offer lower rates as a result because they can fund loans at a cheaper pace. So loan automation is coming. It will save everyone money, consumers, banks, and hopefully lower interest rates as a result. Another example, escrow automation. Our escrow officers that we work with in the South Bay are fantastic. However, escrow is typically a very repetitive process. You order a loan payoff, you order a title report, you're wiring money, cutting checks, et cetera, et cetera. You're gathering information, entering the data. It by no means is an easy job, but let me tell you, a lot of it can be automated. Will there be AI agents that assist escrow officers that make one escrow officer as efficient as 3? Or down the road, are escrows purely AI? I think it happens. Another example, doc generation and preparation. Anyone who's worked with us before on a home sale or a home buy, you know how many documents are prepared. Those are prepared by us as humans and put into DocuSign by us as humans. One day, if I could have an AI agent who filled out our contracts and put it into DocuSign and emailed it to you, that would save hundreds of man hours for our team. I think that happens in a medium to long-term bet here. And then lastly, scheduling automation. You know how much realtors have to schedule their time to show their clients, who then have to schedule with listing agents and their sellers. If we can have an automation system to help on scheduling, again, that will make the market more efficient and time-saving for consumers. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how much AI can help in real estate, making it more efficient and more affordable for consumers. We may lose some jobs in real estate, but hopefully it makes real estate agents, escrow officers, title reps, loan originators all more efficient in the future. So there you have it, guys. Just to recap, so you know, my bets: South Bay home market appreciates 2 to 7%. Mortgage rates will be in a 5.75 to 6.5% for all loans. Still somewhat disappointing. Home inventory will grow at a snail's pace, much to the dismay of home buyers. Affordability, low affordability, casts a shadow over the market. And long-term bet: AI makes its real estate debut. You guys, thank you for joining me on the first podcast of 2025. Next week, we'll get to you on fire insurance. And of course, we will talk maybe a little bit more about the other submarkets' performance throughout the year. I'm wishing all of you a very prosperous 2025. We can't wait to share more episodes and information with you in the future. Have a great week, a great start to New Year, and we will see you next time on the Richard Haynes Real Estate Show. Take care.